Hey everyone, this is Sil. Today we got a special piece of machinery here. It is a 1981 Sachs G4 with around 499 or 466 kilometers on it, so it doesn't have much on it. But I got this from my neighbor. He's retired now. And it's been sitting in his shed for over 30 years. And I thought I'd restore it. It's a nice little moped. I think it's a 50cc Sachs engine. Looks like it's a little marker here. It says 5051D, so I'm assuming that's a 50cc. Still has the original keys. Has a little bit of damage on it because it was dropped once. So eyeballing this thing just a little bit, you can see that it needs signal lights. It does need a bit of wiring as well. When I moved the steering wheel, I had a piece of plastic pop almost in my eye. So it looks like the insulation on these wires are going too. I mean, overall it's been stored pretty well. It looks like he did spray down with some sort of oil substance, and yeah, so that can be easily polished up. That's nice. Needs the front brakes done. They sort of work. The back brakes are completely seized, so I'm gonna have to replace that. It looks like one of the pedals are gone. Yeah, the other one's still there. So that's it. This is gonna be a project during the summer, and we'll see how it goes. First thing that we can start off on this thing is a actual gas tank on it. So I do want to start this thing to make sure that the engine does work. I'm not going to start the engine now, obviously, because I gotta first get some gasoline and in there and whatnot. I know it's a two-stroke, but I had a look at the gas tank, and it's filled with crud actually, but it's not too bad shape. Got some surface rust on the lid, and I don't know if you guys can see, but let me get a flashlight quickly here. Well, as you can see, it's not too bad. It's gonna need some flushing here. So actually, I got some. I heard this works. It's apple cider vinegar. So I'm actually going to pour this down the gas tank here, and hopefully it can flush out that crud that's in there. And once that's out, as you can see, it's going to be needing new fuel lines in here. And once the fuel lines are in, the gas tank is clean, I'm going to have a quick peek at the motor here, pull the plug out, see if this thing can actually even spin over once. Check the compression, check the plugs itself, the wiring, and if it runs, then I guess that's when I'm going to start investing a little bit of money on it to get it back on the road. Okay, so I managed to unclip the gas tank. Actually, I just realized that by taking out a bolt here, which was right here, took out the seat, and didn't realize, but the gas tank just pops right off. And as you can hear, there's a lot of junk in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour in the vinegar in here, let it sit overnight. Tomorrow morning I'm going to rinse it out with clear vinegar oil, and hopefully that's going to fix it. I did get some little BBs. Actually, they're right here. I'll show it to you. So, I saw another video on YouTube where some fella poured in these BBs along with some sort of detergent. I don't know if it was vinegar oil or apple cider vinegar, but he shook a couple times, and it was able to clean it up. So anyways, without further ado, let's get this thing cleaned. 30-year-old 2-stroke fuel mixture. It really reeks. Really reeks. I'm gonna have to probably take a power washer to this thing. Check this out. Look at all that stuff. It's like rust and chunks of dried oil and whatnot. So that smells like apple. Wanted to show you guys one thing. I snipped the battery out from the moped, and check this out. This battery is actually different than I actually thought it would be. So this is actually a 6-volt. I originally thought it was a 12-volt. 3 cells, 2 volts each, 6 volts. It's dry as a bone. There's absolutely nothing in here. That's because there's a crack. So it's time to replace this guy. It is now day 3 or 4. The gas tank's done. Poured out all of the vinegar that was in it and let it sit there for a good 3 days. I poured in those little BBs, metal BBs, shook it around once a day, drained it, and I still had some gunk left in here. So I took actually a pressure washer to it. And I think it did a pretty good job. I let it sit in front of this lamp, this heater, for half an hour just to let it dry up. And as you can see in here, I think it looks pretty darn clean. Anyways, I'm going to let this thing continue to dry. I have ordered a fuel tank liner or sealant. Unfortunately, they didn't have any in Canada, so I ordered it from US. so I shall wait another week or two until it comes in. I'll seal this up and the gas tank. In the previous video, you've probably noticed that the previous battery was completely destroyed. Had a crack in it, nothing you can really do to salvage it. So I purchased this guy for I think like $30, 30 Canadian. And one thing that was pretty neat was the fact that there's no fluids in here. So actually when I read the instructions, it tells you got to fill it up yourself. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. It looks like there's already a premix of, it's kind of hard to take out, premix of sulfuric acid and I believe water. And that's what we're going to be filling up today. There you go. There we go. So it needs a little bit more. There we have it. Okay, here's a little product that I bought. It's called Pour 15. It's called Fuel Tank Sealer. It stops rust, corrosion, and leaks. So I'm actually going to pour this in this gas tank now that it's clean. I'm going to plug the hole underneath with this piece right over here. It's just a little earpiece to prevent noise. So I'll pour that in there, and we'll see what happens next. Feel chunky parts underneath this can here. I'm going to make sure it's nicely mixed. I just took the back wheel off. The main purpose of that is to fix the back brakes. The back brakes did not work at all. I think something got seized. I mean, based on 20 or 30 years of corrosion and rust, I'm not surprised why it's not working. So anyways, I'm going to clean this up, sand it down just a little bit, and lubricate the joints here, and just give it another shot and see if that works.
So I think I figured out why the back brakes don't work. I actually had to figure out first of all how the mechanisms actually work. And from what I can see, the top part right here expands out when this bolt, once it is properly tensioned with this metal piece that's flopping around, it's supposed to rotate this little cylindrical piece, and it's supposed to then expand the brakes. But obviously that's not going to work if this thing's completely loose. So I may just either weld it or see if I can loosen this up and properly get these two mounted together. Apart from that,
the brakes have been sanded down, and I think it looks in pretty decent shape. Not too bad for an old bike.
Okay, so I just realized that I really don't need to weld this. The reason why it was flopping around the whole time was because this guy was placed in between these two little forks, I guess you can call them. And because of that, it didn't give enough tension to actually grip that little pin in there. So now, when you actually pull on it, the brakes should work like that. So it's kind of hard doing it with one hand, but I think you get the idea. So once you pull on the lever on the moped, this expands, and then it just rubs against the little drum in here. That's it. Easy fix. Okay, slow progress on the moped. But I've decided to take a look at the transmission. I found I actually received the manual from the original owner for the Sachs, and I decided to look at the transmission. Reading through the manual, it says that it requires automatic transmission fluid and so forth. So I decided to pull that little plug off, hoping that it's going to drain transmission fluid, but it looked like it was dried. So it seems like the previous owner may have drained it before he stored it, which was a good thing. I just wasn't aware. You'll see a little bolt here sticking out. I actually thought that this was the fill of area where you would actually fill in the transmission fluid. So while this was on, I took it out, and I quickly realized that it wasn't the fill hole, which was a bit of a problem because I couldn't stick this back in here. So anyways, I took it off. I took the little panel off, and I saw this spring just sitting at the very bottom there. So I realized that this whole thing just fell apart as soon as you take this out. This little bar comes out, and this little spring just flings out, and that's about it. Okay, gasket maker is on. Same with on the lid. I just wanted to actually show you, before I put this on, I just wanted to show you something pretty neat. So you'll notice this little groove right over here. At first I wasn't sure what that is, but I think it's an overflow release for the transmission fluid. So I think if you put in too much, it's actually gonna spit it right up here and just pee it all out. Just thought I'd show this to you. While this is drying, I'm gonna move ahead and focus on the front wheel. What exactly do we need to do here? Well, we need to have a look at the front brakes, because the front brakes don't really work too well. They're really stiff, and when I actually rolled the moped down a straight path, I was not really able to stop this thing. So I'm not sure if oil got in there or if it actually just needs some TLC. But anyways, we'll take off the wheel, we'll take off the hub, clean it up, see what's inside. And okay, so I've disassembled the front brakes, and I quickly realized why it's not really functioning too great. Looks like oil got in here. I'm not sure how. I don't know if it was sprayed down before it was stored, but this thing is wet as crazy as it could be. So anyways, I'm going to spray it down with carb cleaner, brake cleaner, and see if it works. So the hub is cleaned. I sanded it down, sprayed it down. Same with the actual hub components in here. It's actually not in bad shape considering it's around 30 years old, over 30 years old. We'll see. Once it dries up, I'll put it together and I'll adjust the brakes and hopefully it works. Okay, so as I was spraying this down with the Gigolo product, I realized there was actually a little screw in the very bottom here. It looks like it requires some sort of oil in here. I'm not sure exactly what kind of oil goes in here, but I'm not sure if the camera's going to pick it up, but there are gears in here. If I move it like this, you can actually see that there's gears in here. So I'm actually going to pour in probably either transmission fluid in here, which I think will do the job. But I really need to pour something in here because when I took the screw out, nothing came out. It was bone dry. And it is still running a little bit rough. So I hope the automatic transmission fluid frees up the little gears in here. So that's it. I thought I'd just show you this because it was quite interesting. I've never seen anything like this before. Okay, so I actually screwed up. I poured in transmission fluid in here just moments ago, and as soon as I tilted over on its side, all of the transmission fluid just leaked right out. I think it's because it wasn't pinned against the bearing and the hub here. So I realized that there's actually a little bit of a screw here. Not a screw, a little bit of a tab that you unscrew, and it controls the. So it actually spins while the whole mechanism here rotates with the wheel. So I'm going to give it another attempt. Instead, I'm going to actually pour in a different type of fluid in here, and this fluid is called Lucas motorcycle fluid. It's or motorcycle oil. It's designed for engines, transmission, and apparently other stuff too. It's a little bit thicker than the tranny oil, so I'm hoping it's gonna work. What I'll do is I'll squeeze some in this hub here. The hub is a little bit loose. As soon as I tighten this bolt down on the other side, this thing actually stays in place. So I'm actually, you know what? I'm actually gonna bolt it down first, and then I'll squeeze in the fluid. Actually, squeeze some in here as well. So as soon as I took this off, there's black grease that came out of here, so I'm assuming it needs a little bit of oil here too. Again, I'm just improvising. I've never done this before, and I know that metal on metal don't really go together too well, so I'm actually gonna squeeze some of this stuff in here. I'm hoping that okay. I think that's it. Okay, the brakes are done. Planes are flying. I've tightened this down not too much, at least a quarter way in. I've screwed up this whole mechanism here all the way in, and when I press the brakes now, or the handle or the lever here, it actually goes halfway through and it actually stops. I moved the wheel a little bit, and it actually works a heck of a lot better than before. And yeah, so the front brakes are done, the back brakes are done as well. I just got to put the bolt through the entire wheel, clean it up a little bit, so front and back are going to be done. And the next step will be focusing on the engine. I got to see what's actually in there. I got to lube it up and check the plugs, and then afterwards we'll move to electrical. I lied. We're not going to be working on the engine yet. I'm actually going to focus the attention on the chain. The chain is actually in pretty decent shape. It's not rusted all the way through. It was greased before it was stored, which is great, so thank you for the previous owner for that. I don't have to buy a new chain for that. So what I'll do is actually, I've already sprayed it down a couple weeks ago, just to soak it in a little bit. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a wire brush to clean this whole thing off on both sides. And then I'm going to use that same spray that I was using before called the Jigaloo Nano to hopefully lubricate this properly and not have to worry about it for a while. So
I wanted to show you the front switch here. There's a headlight switch that goes from on and off, and a little horn button. The switch itself didn't seem right, so I took it apart and I quickly realized that it's missing some sort of pin in between right where that spring is. I'm not sure if you can really see it. So when you flip the switch, it would connect two, looks like copper rods together to make the light go on. It's a quite simple design. I was actually debating whether or not to just put in a different switch and MacGyver it just in a different way, but turns out that I actually made that little missing bead from this to this. So as soon as I actually put it in right where the little spring is, it should work. Okay, so here we have it. We have a little bit of a switch that's MacGyvered, and I got the little bead in there. Kind of works, I guess. So the idea is, which one is it? If these two prongs touch each other, this guy and this, the headlight goes on. And when you want to shut it off, you want to pull it right back. It's kind of hard doing it with one hand. There you go. That's it. On. Okay, so the electrical is pretty much done. We rewired a few things. I added in a fuse, a 7 amp fuse on this, and I've connected the battery to it. It seems to be working, except I got the front headlight to replace. I got obviously the side signal lights to replace as well. Horn works, which is pretty cool. And it looks like the signal switch does work as well, because there's a little lamp on the speedometer that lights up when you put the switch on. So we're going to be moving on to the carburetor now. So there was one bolt that I took out from here, and another two from here, which had the air filter box connected to. So I took that off, and it's pretty simple. Take one bolt out. This slides out like this. So we're gonna disconnect the I believe the throttle cable off of this. I'm gonna remove the old fuel line that's in here. I have purchased new fuel line for this moped, which is great. I'm gonna take off the lower piece off here, drain it, clean it up. I'm pretty sure there's gonna be a lot of gunk in there, so let's get to it. Okay, so I took the throttle cable off. It's quite easy. You just unscrew these bolts up as loose as you can, not all the way through. They don't fall out, which is great. The gaskets on this, or the gasket itself on this, is pretty cool, pretty good condition. I mean, other than that, I mean, the whole throttle body, cleaned it up just a little bit. It looks in pretty decent condition. I took the two screws out of the bottom, and yeah, there is quite a bit of cleaning to do in here. So it looks like very oily substance, which I'm pretty sure we can clean up real good. So I'll clean up the pin. Looks like it has a clogged hole in here. The float looks like it's going to be needing some TLC as well. So yeah, so here we got the carburetor. It's nice and clean. I didn't realize there was actually a filter in here, because normally two-strokes, from as far as I know, are not supposed to use filters. Well, it doesn't seem to be that case. I was very close of putting an aftermarket filter on it, but I read online that it may skew the fuel and oil ratio, so I bothered not touching it. And here is the other piece.
just a little bit of a recap what was done today. I've sanded down the chain with the wire brush, and I sprayed it down with the Jigaloo Nano spray. It actually dried up quite quickly, and it looked like it absorbed everything. We did a little bit of wiring. We put in a little bit of a fuse in here. Connected the battery, tested the electrical. It seems to be working except for the signal lights, which we'll be replacing next. We took apart both the handlebar mechanisms here. This one was fine. Left and right signal turns were working fine. The stop button inside was really rusted, so I sprayed it down with a rust repellent. And on the left side we fixed the headlight switch, which is this guy right here, and it seems to be working. I just need to put in a new bulb in the front just to make sure that everything's working fine. And well, actually before the last thing, we did the throttle body, the carburetor. We cleaned up the carburetor. We cleaned up the air filter. The air filter itself was actually quite clean, surprisingly. I'm not sure if the previous owner put in a new one. And then last but not least, I poured in some automatic transmission fluid into the clutch mechanism as recommended in the documentation. So that's about it. The next thing we're going to do is, like I said, we're going to replace the signal lights and then have a look at the engine just to make sure that everything's okay in there. It does have compression when I pedaled it with the clutch engaged, but I still got to look inside and make sure that I oil it up just a little bit before we do start it for the first time after 30 years. So yeah, that's it.
Hey everyone, it's July 19th. I took a little bit of a break with the moped. I'm going to now work on the rear and front signal lights. We're going to clean up the engine, crank the engine, make sure that the engine's in good working order. We'll assemble the whole thing back together, put new fuel lines in, and start her up for the first time. I was notified. I got some bad news actually. I have been notified by my my ex-neighbor's wife. They already moved out. They used to live actually right here, but the previous owner of the moped actually passed away on June 13th, which is quite sad. I was really hoping I can show this video to him while he was at the hospital, but I guess I couldn't complete it in time. But we'll continue on, and fingers crossed that the project will be successful.
I wanted to show you the replacement of the signal lights. I didn't realize how simple it would actually be. So these are the replacements that I got off of eBay. They were probably the least expensive set that I actually could find, and surprisingly enough, the threads on this thing match identical to the actual moped. I just got to show you how easy this thing is. The thing that I want to actually mention about these turn signals is there were a few options I could have selected on eBay on a type of style of these signals. I could have selected something more modern, more fancy, maybe perhaps even LED to make it look more cool. But I decided not to do that. I decided to go with an old classic style so that it can look all original.
Signal lights are in. I took out the headlight because I had to run the cables through the little bracket here, and it works. wanted to show you how it works. It's left and right. This one's a little bit more dim because the rear is working. And interesting enough, this took me actually 10 minutes to figure out, but when I got the headlight out, I checked to see if the headlight was still good. It is. It doesn't want to go on with the headlight switch set to on. I'm expecting either it just doesn't have enough amperage to light it up, and it probably needs the moped running. But I looked inside. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it or not, but the filament in the bulb looks fine to me. One thing that was a little bit annoying is trying to figure out how to put these little metal clips in. Luckily I still had all of them, but that's how it goes in, and this thing bolts right in like this with one screw holding it in. So let's put it together and move on to the next item. Okay, so I took the exhaust off, the entire muffler and the pipe that goes into the motor itself. I took it out because I'm going to pull the spark plug out, spray in a little bit of carburetor and brake cleaner in there, just to soak up and get rid of that gum buildup that's been sitting there for over 30 years. Once that's done, I'll have a peek inside the combustion chamber, inspect everything just to make sure that there's nothing physically wrong, or obviously wrong, and if everything is good, I'll put it back together and start it up for the first time. Want to see how a 30-year-old spark plug looks like? There you have it. I don't know if it's going to be able to zoom in properly, but there you go. It still has wet oil in it, which is quite surprising. I don't know if it was sprayed down before it was stored, or if this is just the fuel that's been sitting in the combustion chamber for many years. I'll clean this up. I'm going to clean up the actual chamber itself, spray it down, hopefully it leaks out from the bottom of the exhaust, and I'll give her a go. Okay, motor is clean, it runs pretty great. It does have compression. It's really hard to show you because there is no kickstart on this or starter on it. You actually have to pedal and then engage the clutch in order to move the piston in and out. So I won't be able to show you that. But anyway, spark plug is cleaned up. I put a little bit of dielectric grease on it. Cleaned up the terminals really well. It was a little bit quite dirty and whatnot. So we'll just plug it in and get the fuel tank back on again. Run brand new fuel lines into it. I'm actually debating on whether or not to put a filter on it, because one thing I realized, which I forgot to show you, was the fuel tank itself. I mean, earlier on this year, we pressure washed it, we cleaned it up real nice. We put in a product called Pour 15 on it, I think it was called, and it sealed it up really well. This gas tank has been sitting for a while. As you can hear, there is a little bit of debris in there. I don't know how that got in there. I'm assuming it's rust starting to build up, and this is my assumption. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but the main drain of the gas tank is beginning to deteriorate because of the rust. So I'm going to put a filter on it. It's not a fine filter, it's a meshed filter, so it doesn't use any paper filter or anything like that. So it should not affect the fuel and oil ratio, but we'll see. Okay, so before we put the gas tank on, here's what we're working with. This is the bottom piece of the gas tank. As you can see, there's a little bit of a bowl here, a cutoff valve. This cutoff valve is in really bad shape. When I took this apart, there was rubber in here that was deformed. It wasn't deteriorating, luckily, but it was deformed. So I had to take a little bit of a razor blade and cut it back into its shape, and I fit it back in, which means I'm not going to be using this cutoff valve for the fuel. Instead, I will tap this into the fuel lines, as well as put in this Briggs & Stratton fuel filter. It is a meshed filter. It's not one of those paper filters that you normally use. And last but not least, here's the fuel line. There is 4 feet of this, so it should suffice. I got this from Princess Auto Shop at a really cheap price. I think it was like $1.12 a foot or something like that, so not too bad. So what we'll do is we'll run the new fuel line from here up to the fuel tank once I have it installed, and then once that's mounted, the next step will be to pour in some fuel and get her started. Okay, so here we have it. We have a moped that is completely complete. There's no fuel in the fuel tank. This is the fuel lines that I was talking about. There's a fuel filter, fuel cutoff valve. All the panels except one on the other side where it says G4. I left it open where the battery is. That's it. The only things that we really still need to do is get rid of the rust. And pedals, as far as I can see, I got the lock in with new screws. Gas tank is in, everything's plugged in. I think we are ready to power this guy up. On it right now is removing the rust off of the chrome that's around the bike. So we're going to start off with the muffler, which has quite a bit of rust on it. In some areas it has minimal rust on it. I learned a trick online which seems to be working. Without scratching the chrome, you can actually use foil. You grab a piece of foil and put it into a ball and soak it with soap and water, and you scrub it. The rust actually comes off without scratching the actual chrome of it. So let's get started. Oh, actually, one thing that I do want to show you is I was reading the manual off of the moped. They do suggest cleaning this part and the end of these parts out, which I already have, as you can see. I sprayed it down with brake cleaner.
and I cleaned up the inside of it with dish soap and warm water. So I did a fairly good job on it. So right now we're going to be focusing on is getting rid of all this rust that's on it without scratching it. So it seems like it's doing a pretty good job. I mean, it's getting rid of the low to medium rust spots. This is probably the bare metal that was covered in chromium. But I mean, it did a pretty good job for the most part of it. I don't want to scrub it even further and start removing the chrome off of it, but this is bare metal now. There's no rust on it, which is great. So what I'm going to do next, after wiping this dry and cleaning it off a little bit more, is I'm just going to wipe it down with wax and then just buff it out and see what happens.
Cleaned it up with the aluminum foil. This is probably as best as I can get it. It's not perfect, as you can see here. I'm going to buff it out. Maybe that will get rid of some of the ugliness on it. But I mean, other than that, I think it looks pretty damn good. Okay, so we've completed the exhaust, and now we're moving on to the handlebars. This is the before, and this is the after. I think it's doing a fabulous job cleaning it up. So I'm just going to do this. We're going to do this, and the other side, and we can touch up on this a little bit. See it. And that's it. I'm still waiting for the rear tail light to come in from France. But other than that, everything is done. Rust is off, lights are in, everything's tested, it runs, chrome is polished, engine's clean on the inside and sort of on the outside. We got the shocks all cleaned up. Used to be really rusty. So rust was taken off and then it was waxed so that the rust doesn't build up again. That's just a little bit of a kill switch for the battery so I don't drain it. And that's it. That is it. It's been quite the journey. I've started this thing on, I believe, in April. It is now August 5th and we are done.